Cool. Well, hey, thanks, man, for taking the call. You're from. You said you grew up in Rhode Island.
Yeah, well, basically, I was born in Connecticut, and I spent much of my childhood in Connecticut and in Massachusetts. But we had a summer cottage in Narragansett, Rhode Island, all through those years. So most of the year I was elsewhere, but for at least a couple months a year, I was always there in Rhode Island, experiencing being in Rhode Island. And so I kind of give myself half credit as a native Rhode Islander. And then starting in 2000, my family moved permanently to Rhode Island. And we've been there ever since, pretty much. And so, I think by this point I can say I sort of know Rhode Island things pretty well and can probably give you inside information about what it's like to be there more than just a quick little visit on a vacation or something. And it really is a quirky place, and I love it for being quirky. So it's why I hope I can do justice to the state of Rhode Island in talking to you about this right now.
Yeah. Well, tell me what it's like to live there then.
So I guess would you like me to start by giving you like a general presentation about it, or would you like to go through asking me a series of questions or something?
Well, I mean, just a general, higher level overview of the state. Like, what's it like to live there in, 1 minute or less?
1 minute or less. Oh boy, that's tough. It means having a unique accent. It means embracing the past and appreciating the community as a whole. It means having a love for food, especially seafood, and it means appreciating the arts, culture. Boy, it's really hard to fit it all into 1 minute.
Well, it's a small state, so there can't be that much going on, right?
Oh, but you're wrong there. Great things come in small packages. You look at, for example, the United States as a whole, and because it's such a large geographic area, it can be hard to pinpoint a general American culture per se, in many regards. But precisely because Rhode Island is so small, it's easy for it to have a state identity. It's easy for there to be certain generalizations you can make about the state, including things like the pothole problems, including things like the accent, things like the foods that people eat, things like the mannerisms people have. Like for example, funerals are a big thing in Rhode Island, especially funeral processions.
What are funerals? Okay.
Are a big thing, especially funeral processions. And whenever there's a funeral procession, everybody on the road, gets out of the way and they respect it greatly. And it's like, oh wow, there's a funeral. This is a big deal. And another funny thing about Rhode Islanders is oftentimes they'll refer to places that aren't really there anymore. So they might say I found this great new shop. It's right next to where the taco maker used to be. Or if somebody is asking for directions, they'll say, oh yeah, you go down and make a right where Almax used to be. And then if you get to where Benny's used to be, then you've gone too far. And Almax and Benny's are both defunct companies that were in Rhode Island. So anyone who isn't from there is going to be clueless as to what the heck they're talking about. But again, it's just embracing the past and embracing that community. It's a very tight-knit sort of community. And they'll be friendly to outsiders, but there's just this tendency to be so provincial in a sense, and to sort of have certain things that they're accustomed to in this little tiny region. And it is a tiny region. I mean, people will, joke about how if you're going to drive to Woonsocket up in northern Rhode Island, then you got to pack lunch for it because it's wicked far. It's like a half-hour drive, but oh my God, it just takes forever to get there because it's a little state. So if you drive for a half hour, it's like you're going to another state or something. I mean, it's like the equivalent of a Texan driving from San Antonio over to Louisiana or something. So, I mean, you have to sort of think in terms of the spatial dimensions aspect of it,
Yes, yeah. So give me an idea on, the five biggest cities, from Providence to Newport and then there's some other smaller cities. Maybe you could kind of give me like a 1 minute explanation of the biggest cities in Rhode Island.
Sure. So Providence, of course, is by far the biggest city and the capital, and it kind of dominates things in many regards. There are a lot of people from outside of Rhode Island who come and live in Providence, more so than most other parts of the state. So there's a lot of diversity there. There are a lot of poor people in places like South Providence. There are a lot of rich people in places like the east side of Providence. And as a consequence of all of this, you probably are going to see the fewest Rhode Island mannerisms in Providence of all the places, but you'll still encounter them from time to time, especially if you go to places like, say, Federal Hill, which is the little Italy of Providence, basically. And, there are a lot of old-time Rhode Island Italians there who will definitely give you a sampling of Rhode Island in all its glory. Federal Hill is also where there used to be some mobster activity. My dad my dad grew up on Federal Hill, and he used to interact with a mobster called Ray Patriarca.
Okay.
And he was a pretty big-time mobster, actually. I noticed he was on the Wall of Fame at the Mobster Museum in Las Vegas, so that's pretty impressive, I'd say. Providence also has a lot of cultural events, like Waterfire, for example, which is where they take these baskets that they put in the Providence and Woonsocket rivers, and they put a bunch of pieces of wood in them and light the wood on fire in the middle of the night. And people will go down over by the river walk along there to listen to music, play in the background, and just, experience the warmth from the fires. It's a very romantic setting and stuff, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
There's some theatrical stuff going on. There's the Trinity Repertory Company downtown, which usually does a Christmas Carol each year, and it's always a different rendition of it, so that's kind of interesting. And they do many other performances throughout there too. There are great restaurants in Providence, and it's in part because of Johnson & Wales University, which is world-renowned for their culinary arts program. So you can get excellent food throughout Providence, and to a lesser extent, really throughout all of Rhode Island. Rhode Islanders love to eat. They're very passionate about it, especially going to eat at restaurants. So I'd say that's probably, one other thing is the Big Blue Bug. At the top of the New England Pest Control building, they have this giant blue termite. And he's kind of an emblem for Rhode Island. I mean, everybody loves him. And they'll sometimes even put up banners saying stuff like, Brown Dining, would like to congratulate the class of whatever year. They put on this red nose for him at Christmas time, so he's like, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Termite. I mean, it's fantastic.
Okay.
So that's pretty much Providence. Newport's a very different kind of place. It's a lot quieter.
I've actually been to Newport. We stayed there once. So that's the only place I really know, if you can know a place in one day. But yeah, it seems very wealthier, like a lot of old money there. Very charming and fun and picturesque. Is that? Yeah. I mean, is that pretty much?
That's a good description. I mean, there is a lot of wealth, a lot of old wealth in Newport. You can see that through the mansions, for example, on Bellevue Avenue. They have a lot of events like the Newport Jazz Festival, the Newport Folk Festival, the Black Ships, which is a celebration of the opening of Japan, which was facilitated by Admiral Matthew Perry, who was from Newport. And they also have the Tennis Hall of Fame there, the International Tennis Hall of Fame. And something I always appreciated when I was a kid, when I'm going to Newport, was the fudge that they make in Newport. They're kind of known for that too. They've got great fudge in Newport.
I love that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. If you ever end up there again, I highly recommend you get some fudge here while you're there. But I think that's probably what I can say about Newport. I mean, as you said, it's very quaint. It's very wealthy. It's a really nice city. It's very pleasant to be in, albeit a little expensive. But I mean, there's a lot to do, and it's a lot of fun.
So where are the bad places in Rhode Island? Is Pawtucket a bad place?
Yeah, Pawtucket's the ghetto. No offense to anyone from Pawtucket, but the thing about Providence versus Pawtucket, I mean, they're neighboring cities. But what happened was back a long time ago, there was this mayor called Buddy Cianci, who came into Providence. I mean, Providence in the 1970s was a dump. It was awful,
I
absolutely awful.
remember hearing about it. Yeah.
And Bias Yancey came in and he really started to clean the place up. He got indicted for, I guess, throwing an ashtray at his wife's, secret, lover or something weird. And then when he got out of prison, he was more popular than ever before. They reelected him as mayor, and that's when he really went gangbusters. That's why we have the Riverwalk now, and it's absolutely beautiful. And many other, the Providence Place Mall is another example. That was his idea pretty much. So a lot of the revitalization efforts that happened in Providence that made it a really nice city for once were because of Bias Yancey. The problem they had in Pawtucket was they didn't have a mayor to do that for them. And Pawtucket kind of stayed cruddy for the most part over the years, unfortunately. One thing that Pawtucket has going for them is that they have the Pawtucket Red Sox, which is a minor league baseball team. And it's kind of, I guess, a facility that the Red Sox sometimes use for helping players out who are getting back in the game or whatever, but I mean, that's kind of like the only thing that I think Pawtucket really has going for it per se, besides the Slater Mill, which is an excellent piece of history. The Slater Mill was one of the first textile mills in the United States. It was established in 1793. And so that's a pretty nifty thing about Pawtucket. But for the most part, Pawtucket on average is really not in great shape. I'm sorry to say, I wish it were in better shape. I wish it had the transformation Providence had, but it just never really seemed to happen. And a similar kind of city would be Woonsocket, which is up to the north, which is also on the Blackstone River, and was also a mill town just like Pawtucket. Most of the mill workers in Woonsocket were French-Canadian mill workers. And there's actually a museum in Woonsocket called the Museum of Work and Culture, which documents their history. Another interesting thing in Woonsocket that they have is a combination jazz club and Chinese restaurant called Chan's. They call it egg roll and jazz. So that's one thing that they have going up in Woonsocket. But besides those couple of things, Woonsocket for the most part is not in great shape either. And again, I think it's that effect of being an old mill town that was thriving, but then just kind of fell apart after the industry went away and didn't really have the revitalization that it needed.
Okay. So Miscamakit, is that how you say it? The beach down there?
Miscamakit?
Is that pretty, that's where all the Connecticut people go and trash the beach? Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. The people who don't feel like going all the way to the east over to places like Narragansett and Scarborough and stuff, they just sort of camp out over in Miscamakit and Watch Hill. And I mean, my family never went to those beaches very much because we had our summer cottage in Narragansett, so I don't know as much about that area. But I mean, I've heard that the beaches are halfway decent, but I guess from what you've said, I guess the people from Connecticut, so that's not so great.
So Narragansett, that's a nice little beach town. That's where you stay?
Yeah. Narragansett is a nice beach town that's on the mainland and over in the southeastern corner. There's a great restaurant there called Aunt Carrie's that's famous for their clam cakes and for short dinners, which are kind of like these belly buster meals that you have with, clam cakes and chowder and steamers, steamed clams, that is, and fish and chips and lobster and a salad and cinnamon raisin bread and dessert. I don't know how people get through them. It's enormous. But when Aunt Carrie's is closed for the winter months, then people tend to go flocking to George's of Galilee, which is the restaurant where I bought this wonderful "Keep Calm and Clam On" T-shirt that I'm wearing right now.
Keep calm and clam on.
Yeah,
that is so Rhode Island.
It is so Rhode Island. It's why I had to wear this today, in honor of the occasion. And George's has stuff with clam cakes too. But the amazing thing about George's is they're located right by where the fishermen are coming in with their catches for the day. So you can look right across the way at the boat where your fish that you just ate for dinner probably came from. Freshest fish I've ever had. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So what are I keep reading that the people in Rhode Island are sort of like New England people in that they're harsh and they're a little bit standoffish and they have like a little bit of a shell and a little bit of an attitude and a little bit of an edge. Like, how would you describe the people in Rhode Island? And the second part of that would be, how are they different from the rest of New England, if there's a way to describe them.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean by that. You know, I think it depends in part on where you are, because as I mentioned earlier, in Providence there are a lot of people who have come from elsewhere, and so a lot of those people can be pretty friendly, unless they, I guess, come from even less friendly places, in which case that's not going to be the case. But you know, often they're pretty friendly and outgoing. In other places, it can be a little difficult to fit in, but actually, it can be even more difficult if you've been there for a while and then leave permanently, because it's like you left the reservation in a sense. You know, you can sort of feel a little bit shunned by some people. Not everybody, you know, but some people will kind of shun you for leaving. So I definitely agree that there is this certain New England mentality of, you know, not being perhaps as outgoing as certain other groups of people will be. But I think in Rhode Island, you know, a lot of people are willing to reach out to people who are not from there and are kind of lost, and will take them in. I think, though, you know, if you want to differentiate Rhode Islanders from other people in New England, I mean, I think there's even more than anywhere else this appreciation of tradition. And you know, I think it really shows in the distinct Rhode Island accent. Like, for example, to give you a sampling of the Rhode Island accent, you know, there are R's that disappear from the ends of words and reappear at the ends of other words. So a great example of this is the name Tina Turner. A Rhode Islander will pronounce it as Tina Turner. Yeah. And whereas someone from somewhere like, say, Boston or Maine or something might, you know, pronounce something ending with the letters ERS as Oz, a Rhode Islander would pronounce it more as sort of is. So it's like computers would be pronounced as computus, or followers would be pronounced as followers. So it's kind of distinctly different. You know, people have said that it's a little like a cross between a Brooklyn accent and a Boston accent, which makes sense geographically. So it's its own unique thing. And there are even unique words in Rhode Island too. Like, for example, a drinking fountain is called a bubbler, or would be locally pronounced bubbler. And a milkshake would be called a cabinet.
So, a what?
A cabinet.
Cabinet?
A cabinet. Yeah, so you walk into a restaurant and ask for a coffee cabinet. You're not asking them to, like, you know, get out the drill and remove the cabinet they've been storing their coffee in and then give it to you. It means you want a coffee milkshake.
The people are very, if you leave, they'll shun you. Like, you mean like if you move to another state, they think you're like abandoning them? Like, what do you mean by they'll shun you if you move?
Well, I think this is probably becoming less prevalent in more recent years as things become more modern and people travel a lot more than they used to. But growing up in Rhode Island and then going to Connecticut and living there for a long time and then eventually coming back, you know, he had many classmates in Cranston who just kind of acted like it's like, well, I don't do anymore, you know, which hurt his feelings, you know. And I'm sure probably that was not a unique experience. You know, there is a sort of sense. You know, I think it goes back to the whole thing about talking about places that used to be there but aren't there anymore. You know, I think people are kind of in a bit of a bubble in some ways, in some parts of Rhode Island. You know, I think especially in the areas that are suburbs of Providence. You know, the ring around Providence, probably just about the most roady area. You know, places like Warwick and Cranston and Johnston and North Providence. You know, we're going to find a lot of people who are really diehard Rhode Islanders in a lot of ways, and I mean, there are some people who live in Rhode Island and who have never left Rhode Island in their entire lives. It's I'm sure probably hard for people like you to imagine because it's such a small place. But there are people like that. I think there's a certain comfort level to it, you know. And I mean, if that's what brings you happiness in life, then so be it. You know, it doesn't have to hurt anybody. But I think for those who do adventure out a lot, you know, it can be a little perplexing at times to people, you know. Some people accept it, some people won't, but I think it's just a little surprising, probably especially to older people. The younger ones probably not as much, I think, you know. But the funny thing is, even the younger Rhode Islanders, they'll still talk with a Rhode Island accent, you know, as long as they're from certain areas, you know. I think, and in places like the East Bay, the side of Narragansett Bay, like, you know, Barrington, Warren, Bristol, Tiverton, Little Compton, places like that, you know, there are more wealthy people than on average in other parts of the state. And I think a lot of the people who live there, for the most part, and this is definitely not a universal thing, but I think a lot of people there, for the most part, probably are not going to display as many Rhode Islandish sort of behaviors. Just as probably you didn't hear the Rhode Island accent a whole lot in Newport, for example, I suspect, while you were there. Maybe a little bit, but probably not a whole lot, you know. Where there's a lot more wealth, there tends to be a little less of the Rhode Island accent and cultural influence, just because really wealthy people like, I think, in many cases, to insulate themselves. And in so doing, they're not as inclined to be, I guess, mingling with people of lower classes. So, I mean, I think it's just sort of one of those ways of the world. I think
so there's an economic, like, segregation in the state of Rhode Island, then? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, you know, I think one of the nice things about Rhode Island is that there is enough of a middle class so that that culture can thrive. I think one of the problems for the state of Connecticut, for example, is that there is so much income inequality that it's difficult to have that middle class gain ground and be able to flourish with a certain culture. You know, the people who are really poor, they're focused on survival. The people who are really rich are focused on making sure that the people who are really poor don't make them poor. It's the people who are in the middle class who are really comfortable enough with things from both sides to be able to sort of think a bit about things in life, have certain traditions, and celebrate certain things.
So what are some challenges for the state, and what are some things the state's good at that they're kicking butt in?
So one thing I have to say is a real challenge is the quality of the roads. I mean, it's been said before, and it's true, the roads around often are terrible. I remember years ago driving down Olney Street in Providence, and there were so many potholes. I mean, you would be driving along, it's like, it was embarrassing. It was terrible. You're thinking, please don't let me get a flat, because it was that bad. And I think probably the most infamous case of all was that of the Barrington Bridge, which was this bridge that they were building in Barrington, Rhode Island. And they finished it 3 years late.
Okay.
I kid you not.
What's the problem?
It was so bad.
So bad. Are they bad at, like, man? Does the weather play a factor because it chews them up more, or are they they have a crappy road budget, or what's the deal?
Well, I mean, the weather certainly is a factor with the potholes. In the case of you know, the bridge, I think not so much. You know, in the case of the bridge, it was mismanagement, and from what I heard, apparently it was because of the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. I guess they were not managing things very well at all. So, you know, that's a key explanation, I think, as to why the roads are so bad in Rhode Island. You've got to have a good Department of Transportation if you want to have good roads. And at least in the case of that example, they did not do a good job. And, you know, it's not just Rhode Island. I've commented to people from elsewhere before, you know, when they complain that a construction product on a road is going slowly, I say, are you kidding me? Back in New England, this is lightning speed. Because it's not just Rhode Island. In many parts of New England, you know, road construction tends to take a long time. And in part, I think, because of the weather. You know, the winter weather makes it difficult. But still, it gets to a certain point where you run out of excuses. So the roads are not in great shape, and they need to do something about it. One other thing that's an issue is budgetary when it comes to state government, which has incidentally been Democratic for a very long time. The current governor, Jerry Mundo, has basically decided to put tolls for trucks on every road she can possibly put them on. And they're expensive tolls, too. And I think it's going to cause a lot of problems in the future. not just for truckers who are trying to drive through the state to get between New York and Boston or something, but who are just trying to deliver food to Rhode Island from elsewhere. That's a serious issue. So there's a lot of mismanagement when it comes to stuff like that. On the topic of food is one area where we kick ass.
Okay.
And we have
Is
a lot
it
of
seafood?
food.
Is it mostly seafood and
Well,
whatever?
there's a lot of seafood, but there's other stuff too. So if you'd like, I can give you a listing of some very Rhode Islandy foods.
Yeah.
So one type is Rhode Island clam chowder, and Rhode Island clam chowder is clam chowder made with a clear broth. Traditionally, it's been made with clam broth, but in more recent years, some people are using a chicken broth. And then there are two other types of chowder, which are not really Rhode Island foods, but the other two types are New England clam chowder, which is the milk or cream-based one, and the other type is Manhattan clam chowder, which is tomato-based chowder. I actually have this wonderful book called the Rhode Island Dictionary.
Oh,
And,
wow, look at that.
It's illustrated by It's illustrated by Don Bousquet, who's a local cartoonist. He makes comic strips for the Providence Journal every week, and it's written by Mark Patinkin. And if I may, I'd love to be able to read to you the entry for chowder, because it's a great example of the Rhode Island accent and what chowder is all about here in Rhode Island. So, the explanation about chowder is this. Next to coffee, milk, and lemonade slush, more on that later. Rhode Island's third most popular liquid fruit drink. My grandfather Elmer still makes the best chowder in the state. Every August, he goes down cellar and stirs up 20 gallons, clams, clam juice, onions, potatoes, and salt pork. He gets the whole family to spend the week before digging quahogs at the shore. Then we shuck him and he goes to it. It's a secret recipe that he also puts in black pepper, white pepper, and cayenne pepper. And he puts in parsley stems and cream and butter. Some people like tomatoes, but not Grandpa Elmer. He doesn't use any food processor either. He chops everything with the same hatchet he uses to kill. He's never written the recipe down, but always tells us, if we don't remember anything else, remember the salt pork. And he's got no problem if you want to add your own garlic powder and Worcester sauce. Oh, and by the way, Grandpa has no time for people who make it the red New York way and call it chowder. Blasphemy, he says. In his book, Red Chowder Ain't Chowder. It's water.
Dang, man.
So that's a sampling of the Rhode Island accent and all about chowder. So that's one of the famous foods in Rhode Island. That's truly Rhode Island. You're not going to see Rhode Island clam chowder too many other places. Another famous food is called clam cakes. And clam cakes are like corn fritters, but they're filled with pieces of clam instead of pieces of corn. And a similar kind of food, but sort of not so similar, is a Johnny cake, which is kind of like a pancake, but it's made with cornmeal instead. And those are usually eaten at breakfast with maple syrup and baked beans, and then some breakfasty foods like maybe sausages and eggs, fruit salad, whatever. Another Rhode Island food is called hot wieners. And hot wieners are basically like these thin hot dogs that are made of a mixture of veal and pork. And they're served in a bun, and they put on top of them this kind of like a sloppy Joe sauce. It's a tomato-based meat sauce, and celery salt, and grilled diced onions and mustard. I hate mustard, so I always ask for mine without mustard. But that's how it's traditional. And something people like to wash that down with is coffee milk, which is kind of like chocolate milk, but they use a coffee syrup for it instead of a chocolate syrup for it. And then another popular food in Rhode Island that's very roady is called pizza strips. And these are kind of like little rectangular slices of pizza that are served at room temperature and with no cheese on them. The story behind this is you had all these bakeries that would have this leftover dough at the end of the day, and they didn't know what to do with it, so they decided to make pizza with it. And then they would just leave it out on the counter overnight, and then the next day they'd sell it to people, as one of the things. Well, the health department complained, why aren't you keeping the cheese refrigerated? It's not safe to be selling people dairy products that have been refrigerated overnight. Okay. So they stopped putting the cheese on it. And that's why the pizza strips don't have cheese on them. But they're still served at room temperature. So they're kind of a little quirky. But not for nothing. They're not really anything special,
Yeah. So what's the ethnic influence there then primarily?
So it's a blend of all sorts of cultures, but I'd say probably the strongest influences are Italian and Portuguese, which probably will explain why Rhode Island is the most Catholic state in the nation, with 42% of residents identifying as Catholic.
Yeah, I know. I heard it's 20% Italian in that state. Does that sound
Yeah,
legit?
a lot of Italians. I mean, my dad, for example, is 100% Italian. And in Federal Hill, you'll find a lot of Italians. But throughout the whole state, there are a lot of Italians, and to a lesser extent, a lot of Portuguese people, too. Especially in East Province, there are a lot of Portuguese people, in particular, hailing from the Azores. That's the part of Portugal that a lot of people in Rhode Island are from. Um, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to, if I can, I'd like to finish my list of the foods and beverages from Rhode Island.
Yeah, please do.
So lemonade slusho is referenced in the Rhode Island dictionary. They're talking about frozen lemonade, which is typically Dell's frozen lemonade, which is literally like lemonade slush with little pieces of lemon zest and seeds in it sometimes if you get it at the right places, like push carts or stores or trucks. And another Rhode Island beverage is called an awful waffle, which you get at Newport Creamery. And these awful waffles are huge, and they're very thick, and they're made of ice milk and syrup. And actually, a little while ago, they did this little temporary thing where they even had big blue bug waffle waffles that they made blue. They had little jimmies in them, sprinkles in them. So I guess the sprinkles were supposed to be the bugs in the big blue bug waffle waffle. So that was super roadie, I guess. But I think that's probably it for the foods and beverages. I mean, I think it's a pretty extensive list. You know, I think most places don't have that many truly unique foods. I mean, there are certain other foods that are very popular in Rhode Island that you probably won't see in a whole lot of other places, or maybe not decisively Rhode Island. Like, for example, New England boiled dinner, which is basically corned beef and cabbage and potatoes and carrots, and sometimes beets. Or lobster ravioli is very popular because of the lobsters that are available and all the Italian people. And another popular thing is Portuguese sweetbread, like bolos. And so those are just some examples of foods that are truly uniquely Rhode Island or are unusually popular in Rhode Island, given its location and its cultural heritage.
Yeah, so if you were going to break the state up, you know how I do stereotypes of different regions, and you were to be like, okay, the Northeast is like this, the Providence area is like this, down here, like, can you give me like a quick, like 30-second rundown on the different regions that you would split the state up into?
So western non-coastal Rhode Island is basically farms and forest. Along the Blackstone River, up in the sort of northeastern part of Rhode Island, is mill towns. Just to the west of there is Twin River Casino. So, you know, that's kind of like its own little category.
What's it called?
Providence, Twin River Casino.
Okay, is there like a Native American thing going on up there, or
I don't really think so per
legal?
se, which is kind of unusual. And yes, it is very much legal, and Rhode Islanders love it because they don't have to pass state lines to go to it. Because God forbid they have to travel all the way to Foxwoods because that's so far away.
Yeah.
Right? They've got Providence, which is kind of like, you know, the heart of it all, you know, the beating heart of Rhode Island. And then the areas surrounding Providence in an arc, or what I would call like sort of super roadie, you know, it's where you find the most roadie sort of people. The South Coast has beaches and clam shacks. Newport is pretty much, you know, Newport. And then the areas to the east are sort of affluent and quaint. And I'd have a little blotch on the map over in the northern parts of East Providence that could be labeled as like sort of annex of Massachusetts' New Portugal. Because it pretty much is. Yeah, I mean, you probably recall the New Portugal part of your Massachusetts map as being over by New Bedford and Fall River and stuff, you know, over in that neck of. And so that sort of spills over into parts of East Providence as well. It's just very Portuguese over there.
Okay. How has the state changed over the last, you know, I mean, is it changing in a good way, in a bad way? Are there more people moving there? Are people leaving there? Like, you could identify certain trends that some states have where it's like, like Colorado, for instance, is becoming a lot more liberal, and a lot of people are moving from the West, and they're changing the culture of Colorado, where it used to be like a more mountainy cowboy type place where people ate meat out in the sticks, and now it's pretty much becoming Portland light in Denver, as an example. So is there a way you can pinpoint any ways that Rhode Island has changed or is changing?
Well, as my dad has said, traditionally Rhode Island has been politically liberal and socially conservative. It's been a big union state for the most part. But it's been somewhat more conservative when it comes to certain social values. Still definitely not quite like being in a really conservative country like Mississippi or Alabama or something, but conservative by Northeastern standards. I think probably in the age of Trump, there have been a lot of people, especially in areas like central Rhode Island, I think, who have become significantly more entrenched in their conservative values. I think in particularly liberal areas like Providence, they've gone the opposite direction. I think it's probably getting more politically polarized than before, I would say. I think, unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about what has happened progression-wise in most of the state over the course of the years, but I can tell you this, Nick. When I first moved to Providence in 2000, Vice Yancey had set everything up beautifully, and it was a fantastic place, really happening. And over the years since then, Providence has really dilapidated considerably, and it just is not the shining gem it once was. Is it better than the 70s? Sure. But I think probably because it is just not as strong as it once was, it probably is becoming less and less appealing to people than it once was. And so I would say, if it hasn't already been happening, I would predict that in the future, fewer people are going to be interested in moving to Providence from elsewhere. As for the rest of the state, I think probably, as far as I know, it's roughly sort of steady in terms of people moving in and out. But I think all of that could change if the government continues to be run really poorly. I know a lot of people in recent years have not been particularly enthusiastic about our governor. And I suspect that probably is not going to change a whole lot in the future. So, I would say it's sort of so-so these days in terms of the stability around. There are worse places to be. There are better places to be. There are certainly more liberal places to be in the Northeast. But there may also still be some more conservative places to be than that, too. It's sort of middle of the road, I think. I don't know if that answered your question well, but I hope it did.
So Providence was shitty in the 70s, and then it kind of got better, and now it's getting worse again. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. In the early 2000s, when Vice Yancey was still in charge, and my family had moved to Providence, Providence was a fantastic place, and I would recommend it to anybody back in those days. And then the years since then, it sort of slowly started to slide. But I think in the last few years in particular, it's just been really plunging and become a lot worse. It's still better than the 70s, still a lot better than that, but just not. I think probably the best example of it is Providence Place Mall. Providence Place Mall used to be a really nice place to go hang out, and had some great anchor stores and stuff, a lot of sophisticated shopping. And in recent years, it's gotten so bad that security officers would say, "Don't go there. It's not safe. It's dangerous to be hanging around that place." So I think that's an example of how Providence has been degrading in recent years.
Yeah. So I guess I've got a bunch of more questions, but what I can do is just email it to you. What's the so state pride wise? I hear Rhode Island has the worst state pride out of all states. But then from you, I'm gathering that Rhode Islanders or roadies seem to be pretty prideful and kind of like territorial and almost, you know, the opposite of not having state pride.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
is it like
I
one of
mean,
those, how would you define that?
I would definitely say don't believe the people who tell you that Rhode Islanders are in 50th place for state pride, because it is just a big fat lie. Um, I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, I know that when I became a full-time Rhode Islander, I was excited. I was really excited to become a full-time Rhode Islander because the place just has so much culture to it, you know? Sophisticated culture, not sophisticated culture, whatever, you know, you put it all together, it's just a fascinating place to be and to experience being in. So, I mean, I know I'm proud to be a Rhode Islander, and I think a lot of Rhode Islanders are very proud to be Rhode Islanders. Maybe some people are big time detractors, but there are an awful lot of people, I would say, who would balance that out, who are really big, big fans of the state, and rightfully so. It's a great state. So I don't know who told you that the people in Rhode Island are not proud to be Rhode Islanders, but I have to disagree a lot with that statement. Not just a little bit. I have to disagree a lot. And I think it's good that they're proud to be Rhode Islanders. I think it's a beautiful thing that they cherish the place that they're from, and all their traditions and customs and foods and beverages and quirky things that they do, like putting vinegar on their French fries, you know, stuff like that. So I mean, I think it's a beautiful place and filled with a lot of pride of being from there. And if I misjudging the way things are today, then it makes me sad to hear that there are people who think that. But I guess as with everything, it depends on whom you ask. You know, it depends on whom you ask. And but when you ask me, I say Rhode Islanders are a very proud bunch and they have every right to be.